What would make an entire civilization leave everything behind? No war, no plague, no final battle etched in stone. Just silence. Cliffside cities abandoned in perfect order. Pots still full. Fires left to smolder. Footpaths trailing off into desert sky. I asked this question as I stood alone at the edge of a canyon, wind curling through the bones of Mesa Verde. Behind me, the dwellings clung to the cliff, like echoes of a forgotten language. Before me, only stars, bright, watchful, unblinking. The locals don't say they disappeared. They say they walked into the sky. I came here as a seeker of ruins, of riddles, of traces left in the dust. But what I found was more than history. It was a passage, a threshold, and once I crossed it, nothing felt still again. Come with me. Let's walk the roads they left behind into the stone, into the stars, and into the silence where the Ancient Ones are still speaking. The wind was dry and sharp as I crossed the narrow ledge into the heart of Cliff Palace, the largest of Mesa Verde's ancient dwellings. The sandstone bricks beneath my boots had held their shape for over 800 years. Each one was smoothed by hand, placed by intention, sealed with mud and ash, and yet there was no one left. Not a soul, only the bones of a once great people, scattered in the form of potsherds and soot-blackened ceilings. But here's the thing that keeps me awake. Nothing was looted, nothing was destroyed. Rooms still held tools, grinding stones were left in place. Corn cobs hundreds of years old were tucked in storage bins as if someone meant to come back, but no one ever did. It wasn't abandonment, it was exit. Some scholars say it was climate, others blame warfare or over-farming. But when I stepped into the central plaza, I didn't feel crisis. I felt decision, a choice. A migration not away from danger, but towards something unknown, something awaited, not fled. Inside one of the ceremonial chambers, a Kiva sunken into the earth, I brushed dust from the fire pit. It hadn't seen flame in centuries, but the soot was still there. Around the edges, small handprints had been pressed into the plaster. Children's hands, families, stories that once circled the fire, now swallowed by time. The ceiling above was blackened not from collapse, but from use. Hundreds of years of fires, breath, songs rising toward the smoke hole. That narrow eye in the ceiling, perfectly aligned with the path of the Sunday. This wasn't just shelter, it was sacred geometry. Then I noticed the Sipapu, a small hole in the floor of the Kiva, the symbolic birth canal, marking the place where the first people are said to have emerged from the underworld. In Hopi tradition, this is where life begins. But I wondered, could it also be where life returns? I moved room to room in silence. Some had been sealed off with stacked stone. Others were open to the sky. Their roofs collapsed, exposing beams made of ancient juniper. I ran my fingers along one. It flaked with age. But it still held the memory of the forest it once came from. One chamber had a spiral carved into the wall. Simple, deliberate, precise. It pointed toward the rising sun on the solstice. A calendar, yes, but more than that. A signal, a path. The spiral, in many indigenous traditions, marks a journey inward or upward. From the cliff edge, I looked out across the valley. The vast emptiness felt curated, as if the land itself remembered what had happened here and refused to let it be forgotten. There are places in the world that echo when you speak. Mesa Verde echoes when you think. The wind shifted. I thought I heard voices, not whispers, but movements, the kind of people make when they know where they're going. That's what haunts me. Not their disappearance, their certainty. What could drive an entire civilization to rise one morning and begin the walk away from stone, from fire, from home, and into legend? This was not the end of a story. It was the turning of a page. And somehow, I had arrived just after the ink had dried. It wasn't marked on any modern map. Not really. Just a faint discoloration on satellite images. A line too straight, too stubborn, cutting across the broken skin of the desert. I followed it on foot, past sagebrush and shattered stone, past boundaries drawn by men who had no idea what lay beneath their feet. This was no road meant for wagons, no path carved by erosion or chance. This was intention, precision. Chaco Canyon's great roads, hundreds of miles long, 30 feet wide, built not for commerce, but for something else, something still pulsing beneath the dust. The first one I found led north, away from the ruins of Pueblo Bonito, the ceremonial heart of the Chacoan world. The ancient planners had etched it directly over cliffs and canyons. No curves, no detours. Even the terrain bowed to its will. I knelt and ran my hand along the packed earth. It was compacted still hard as fired clay even after centuries of wind and rain. In places, it was flanked by low masonry walls. In others, it simply vanished into open space, only to reappear miles away, as if stitched into the land by some forgotten logic. But where did it go? Archaeologists offer theories trade with distant pueblos, migration routes, ceremonial processions. But standing in the stark quiet of that empty road, I couldn't help but feel I was standing on something more. A message, perhaps, or a map. The ancient builders didn't construct switchbacks or follow water. They followed the stars. The roads align with solstice markers, celestial events. Some point toward the far-off San Juan Mountains. Others, toward nothing visible unless you raise your eyes skyward. The Anasazi were not just builders of stone, they were architects of the cosmos. One section of road, the Great North Road, stretches toward the Badlands with a strange consistency. Archaeologists have noted its eerie alignment with the path of the Milky Way. The locals once called it the Road of Souls, a symbolic artery not for trade, but for transition, a corridor between this world and whatever came next. I met a Dene elder near the edge of the canyon. He didn't step onto the road, he just looked at it, then at the sky. They walked, he said, but not like you or me. That night, I returned alone. The moon was down, the sky, vast and watching. And that's when I saw it. Above me, the Milky Way arched overhead, bright and rippling, and beneath it, the road, mirroring it, stretching away like a reflection not in water, but in memory. What if the Anasazi didn't build these roads to go somewhere, but to remember where they came from? What if they were never meant to lead forward, but upward? Pueblo Bonito itself, with its D-shaped layout and 800 rooms, was more observatory than city, more shrine than shelter, and all its great roads led outward like spokes in a wheel or rays from a sundae. This was not a civilization expanding, it was one preparing. Preparing for a journey not across land, but across realms. And the roads, they weren't just paths, they were invitations. When I left the canyon, I didn't use GPS. I followed the old line as far as it would take me, and in the silence, in the space between footprints, I heard it again, that same echo I'd heard at Mesa Verde. Not a voice, not words, just movement. Still walking. I didn't find the pattern. The stars did. Late one night, I spread out a map of ancestral Puebloan ruins beneath the glow of a lantern. It was a worn chart marked with the locations of Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, Joven Weep, Aztec ruins. Places I'd walked, places I'd felt something stir beneath the stone. I turned off the light. Outside my tent, the desert sky was ink black and infinite. The stars were sharp, raw, and unblinking. Then, something strange happened. 3 points of light, Alnitak, Alnilam, Mintaka, hung perfectly aligned. Orion's belt. I glanced down at the map. My breath caught. The sights on the paper mirrored the stars above me. Chaco, Aztec, and Salmon, spaced with uncanny similarity to the celestial line. The orientation was more than symbolic. It was structural, intentional, a terrestrial echo of a cosmic truth. I wasn't looking at a random scattering of ruins. I was looking at a star chart built into the earth. Orion has long held sacred meaning in ancient cultures. In Egypt, The pyramids of Giza mirror its belt. In Central America, the Maya linked it to death and rebirth. And here, in the southwest, it seems the Anasazi may have been drawing it, not just on paper, but with stone, soil, and settlement. But why Orion? In Hopi tradition, the stars of Orion are guardians, watchers. The belt marks a celestial ladder connecting this world to the next. To build according to Orion's bones is to anchor heaven in the dust. I traveled next to Hovenweep, a cluster of stone towers near the Utah-Colorado border. Perched on canyon rims, the towers look like ancient observatories. Some are aligned with the solstices, others with lunar standstills. But from a particular vantage, their placements also reflect the shoulder and feet stars of Orion's frame. I sat alone atop one of those towers as twilight bled into night. The sky bloomed. Orion rose. And for a brief moment, the ruins and the stars were one. No sound, no wind, just alignment. What if the Anasazi weren't simply building cities? What if they were creating mirrors? If their sacred spaces weren't just for worship, but for remembrance of a place far older than any ruin? A place in the sky. Chaco's ceremonial roads, too, seem to radiate from its central complex like beams from a constellation. And many of these routes, scholars now believe, align with the movement of the Orion group throughout the year, as if each pilgrimage was part of a larger choreography, a dance timed with the stars. The question isn't just how they did this, it's why. To align one's life with the heavens is to seek harmony, to see the sky not as backdrop, but as teacher. The Anasazi weren't stargazers, they were skywalkers. Their calendars, their cities, even their migrations, all timed to cosmic rhythms. And maybe that's what their disappearance truly was. Not collapse, not conquest, but synchronization. When the stars shifted, perhaps so did they. Following Orion across the sky, across generations, across whatever veil separates memory from myth. I folded the map and looked back at the sky. The stars hadn't moved. We had. And I wondered, when Orion rises again tomorrow, who else might still be watching from somewhere beyond the ruins? The Kiva was buried. I found it after a storm rain had carved away part of a canyon wall in the Navajo sandstone, revealing a small sunken circle in the earth. Not marked, not mapped, just waiting. The descent was steep. I used an old rope and followed the smooth stone ladder rungs down into the hollow. The air was still, heavy, like something had never left. It was small, maybe 8 feet across, lined with sandstone bricks, perfectly cut. At the center, the hearth, cold now, but the ash beneath the layer of sand still held the faint scent of juniper smoke. As if someone had just extinguished the flame, I moved slowly. Every Kiva tells a story, not just through its form, but its silence. The walls were decorated with faded pigments, ochre, black, white. Geometric lines formed steps, spirals, and one figure, a man without a mouth, just eyes, watching, listening. At the base of the wall was the Sipapu, that sacred hole in the floor symbolizing emergence from the previous world, a portal, they say, to the underworld. But here, in this forgotten place, it felt more like a wound. Around the hearth, 4 black feathers had been arranged in a cross. In the fire pit itself, I found traces of turquoise dust, not fragments dust, ground intentionally. Offered. Above me, the hole in the roof, the chimney let in a thin shaft of light. It struck the Sipapu directly. I waited. The sun moved. The beam slowly crawled across the floor until it touched the feathers. It was timed. Not random. Not decorative. A ritual. Something had been done here, again and again, with precision, with reverence. A ceremony not for the living, but for those preparing to leave. Rituals of death? Possibly. But there were no bones, no offerings for the dead, only symbols of journey, of crossing thresholds. And that's when it struck me, this Kiva wasn't a tomb. It was a launch site. The Anasazi, or ancient Puebloans, believed the world was layered, that we live in the 4th world, having emerged from 3 others, each transition marked by catastrophe and ascension. What if this Kiva was not about mourning, but transformation. I knelt near the Sipapu. The silence pressed against my ears. Then not a sound, but a pressure, like a presence. Not hostile, just watching. In many Puebloan stories, the people don't just survive disaster, they prepare for it. They fast, they pray, they gather. And when the time comes, they don't run, they rise. This Kiva may have been where such rising began. I thought of the objects left behind in other dwellings. Baskets still woven tight, sandals by the door, dried corn strung in braids, all undisturbed, as if life had paused. As if departure was not panic, but passage. Were these Kivas used in final ceremonies? Not of death, but of rejoining the stars? Every civilization has its rites of passage. But here, the passage wasn't into adulthood. It was into elsewhere. A new cycle. A different form. The Hopi speak of a fifth world to come, one that the faithful will enter when the time is right. Perhaps the Anasazi simply went early. As I climbed out of the Kiva, I didn't look back. Some chambers are meant to be entered only once and remembered forever. It always begins with water. Not fire, not war, not plague, but silence where a spring once sang. High in the desert mesas, I traced a dry stream bed that once fed dozens of cliff dwellings. The locals still call it the Ghost Vein. It hasn't run in centuries, yet the channel is sharp, as if thirst itself had carved it. The Anasazi knew water better than we do. They built catchments, reservoirs, irrigation systems, feats of hydrological engineering etched into stone. They didn't just collect it, they revered it. In every wall, every mural, every ceremony, water was spirit, life, messenger. And then, around the year 1275, it vanished. The tree rings tell the story. A 20-year drought struck the southwest. Not just dry catastrophic. Entire forests stopped growing. Crops withered. Corn, their sacred sustenance, failed. But this wasn't just an environmental crisis. It was an existential one. In their worldview, water wasn't a resource. It was a covenant, a sign of cosmic balance. If it ceased, something had been broken. The people, they believed, had strayed. And the earth responded. I sat by the edge of an old reservoir near Kayenta. Its walls collapsed, its basin now dust and wind. In the center was a small stone, a carved frog, worn smooth by centuries, the rain-bringer. Even in absence, they remembered what once was. Many archaeologists point to the drought as the tipping point of the Anasazi exodus. But again, the evidence resists collapse narratives. Villages weren't burned, graves weren't dug in haste. Instead, people moved. Gradually, deliberately. North, south, east, toward the lands of the Zuni, the Hopi, the Rio Grande Pueblos. It was not retreat, it was pilgrimage. I found another clue in a canyon wall, a petroglyph of a cloud with a spiral descending. Beneath it, a human figure holding a bowl up to the sky, not begging offering. The story wasn't, we lost the rain. It was, we offered ourselves to it. What if the drought wasn't punishment, but signal? A celestial summons, a thinning of the veil, a moment the old stories had prepared them for. Water was more than survival. It was prophecy. In the Kivas, they painted spirals not just as sun symbols, but as pathways. Some spiraled inward, others spiraled out. When water disappeared, it wasn't seen as random. It was time. Time to walk the spiral out. Time to follow the sky. The Zuni speak of a time when the ancestors left their stone villages because they were called home. The Hopi say their forebears followed the signs, drought, stars, silence, and stepped across into another way of being. Not gone, just gone from here. As I stood in the dry basin, a single cloud passed overhead. No rain, just shadow. It moved across the landscape like memory. I thought of those last days in the cliff dwellings, watching the springs fail, hearing the rivers fall silent, not with panic, but with understanding. They hadn't been abandoned by the land. They had outgrown it. And so they walked into the drought, into the spiral, into the sky. I found the wall by accident. A flash flood had cleared a wash near Butler Wash, revealing a narrow trail carved into the sandstone. The locals had no name for it, just a warning the place was listening. It led to a shallow overhang, hidden behind cottonwoods and thorn brush. And there across the red stone canvas was a mural, faint but intact, stretching nearly 20 feet. Figures floated, not walked, floated. They rose in arcs from the ground, their limbs outstretched, their heads crowned with rays. Spirals surrounded them, some open, some closed. Above them, a line of dots led skyward. It was not chaos. It was choreography. This was not a hunting scene, not a victory tale. This was departure. The petroglyphs left by the Anasazi or their predecessors are not merely art. They are records, rituals, warnings. And here, beneath that canyon wall, I felt as if I'd arrived too late for a ceremony that had already begun. I sat for hours beneath that overhang. In the hush of the desert, the images seemed to move. The figures climbed not a ladder, but a rhythm. Spirals of dust lifted on the wind. I watched as one figure, arms raised, appeared to become light itself, a radiant blur etched in stone. Were these myths or memories? In the oral traditions of the Pueblo peoples, spiral symbols often represent migration, but not just across land, across dimensions, worlds, lifetimes. This wasn't just a map. It was a passage. One petroglyph showed a humanoid form being met by another taller, crowned, holding what looked like a wand or staff. Beside them, a doorway, open. Beyond it, only stars. I traced the grooves with my fingers. They were smooth, deliberate, cut deep enough to endure centuries of sand and Sunday. And yet, no two scholars agree on what they mean. Some say they mark astronomical events. Others suggest hallucinations, ritual trance states. But none of those explanations sat right with me. Because this mural wasn't explaining, it was declaring. We left. Not as victims, not as ghosts, as pilgrims. And like all pilgrims, they left signs for those who might follow. The wall whispered questions. What were they walking toward? Who was waiting on the other side? And why did they leave these maps in stone unless they believed someone would need them again? In one corner, almost invisible, was a single handprint, 5 fingers, small, a child, perhaps. Next to it, a spiral. Perhaps it was a goodbye, or a welcome. Not all journeys end with footprints. Some leave only echoes, etched in rock, dreamed in silence. And in that canyon, surrounded by centuries of stone and story, I understood these weren't just petroglyphs. They were instructions. It struck me first in Chaco Canyon, a strange absence in a place otherwise rich with history. No cemeteries, no burial mounds. Not in the way you'd expect from a civilization of this scale. Thousands lived here, built here, prayed here, and yet only a handful of bodies have ever been found. Where are the dead? Archaeologists have unearthed some remains, scattered bones in great houses, a few high-status burials in crypts beneath floors. But for the everyday people, the farmers, the builders, the children, the silence is profound. No mass graves, no ossuaries, no war pits or disease layers. It's as if they simply stepped out of time. I returned to a site near Aztec ruins, where a small chamber once held ceremonial items, turquoise beads, feathers, stone carvings, objects of ritual, but no human remains, not even ashes. Yet the space felt sacred, funereal almost, a place not of endings, but of release. Some cultures burn their dead, others bury them. The Anasazi seem to have done both and neither. One theory suggests the dead were left in the open, exposed to the elements, a sky burial. But even then, bones remain. And here, they don't. The Hopi speak of transformation, that the body is only temporary, a husk to be returned to the land or the wind. The spirit, they say, continues on, unseen but not lost. I met a Zuni elder near a dry arroyo once. I asked her about the Anasazi dead. She just looked at me and said, "You're standing on them." But her tone wasn't one of mourning. It was reverence. The ancient ones, she explained, didn't die like we think. They changed. Their departure wasn't a funeral, it was a graduation. A moving on. The concept echoed something I'd heard again and again among Pueblo storytellers, that the Anasazi didn't disappear, they became something else. Cloud people, light walkers, Kachinas. And suddenly, the absence of graves made a different kind of sense. Because there was no end to mark, only a door. At one site in the Little Colorado River Valley, I found a structure thought to be a burial platform, but it held only offerings, no body, no bones. Just a single carved spiral stone set in the center. Not a grave, a symbol, a message. Gone from here, not gone. It challenges our understanding of civilization. We're trained to look for endings, for evidence of collapse, of conquest. But the Anasazi leave behind only ambiguity. Their story trails off, not in ruins, but in silence. And in that silence is possibility. Perhaps they left the world not in death, but in ritual. Perhaps they didn't fall, they rose. And the reason we cannot find their bones is simple. They carried nothing with them. Not even themselves. Fajada Butte rises like a sentinel from the desert floor, 400 feet of stone, isolated, untamed, untouchable. From below, it looks ordinary, but the ancients knew better. I climbed it at dawn. Not the whole way, modern paths are blocked to preserve what lies near the top, but I went as far as the sandstone would allow. And there, through the early light, I saw it. 3 slender slabs of rock, leaning against the cliff face, like pages half opened. Behind them, in shadow, a spiral carved into the stone. This was no decoration. This was a calendar older than most nations. The Anasazi called it the Sun Dagger, though we don't know what they named it. We only know what it does. At the solstices, a dagger of light pierces the spiral, slicing it with a precision that defies erosion, time, and chance. On the summer solstice, the light bisects the center. On the winter solstice, twin rays bracket it perfectly. The lunar cycle, too, dances through its angles. This is not guesswork. This is knowledge. Not simply of time, but of rhythm. Of the sky's pulse. Standing there, I realized this wasn't just astronomy, it was invocation. To align your life with the cosmos isn't just science, it's surrender. They didn't use telescopes. They used stone, Sunday, patience, faith. The Sun Dagger wasn't a place to observe. It was a place to remember. To remember how light touches the earth. How sky becomes story. How time, real time, doesn't tick. It turns. And perhaps, how to know when to leave. Because if the Anasazi built this, then they weren't just tracking the solstices. They were watching for something. Waiting. Maybe a sign. A signal. A moment when the spiral aligned, and the way opened. What if Fajada Butte wasn't just a calendar? What if it was a key? A portal? Not of stone, but of meaning? In many cultures, spirals represent cycles, life, death, rebirth. But here, the spiral moved with light itself. It was alive, breathing with the Sunday. And it was placed intentionally, precisely where the walls of Chaco Canyon could see it. This was the heart, the heartbeat. And when it changed, perhaps so did everything else. In the years after 1300 CE, Chaco was abandoned, not burned, not destroyed, just left. Like a ritual completed, like a song whose last note had been sung. Perhaps the Anasazi watched the Sun Dagger one final time, saw the light split the spiral, and knew it was time. Time to walk the spiral outward. Time to follow the Sunday. And so they left, not in chaos, but in choreography, guided by the same light that had once taught them when to plant, when to pray, and now, when to depart. I had followed stone and silence for months, but it was the voices that finally spoke. Not through ruins, not through carvings, through people. The Zuni and Hopi still live in the land the Anasazi left behind. Their languages echo with ancient syntax, their dances, their songs they remember. Because they are not descendants of the Anasazi, they are them. I sat across from a Hopi elder in the village of Shungopavi. The air was thin, high on the mesa, and the wind carried grains of red dust through the alleys of adobe homes. He offered me blue cornmeal in a carved bowl, an old gesture of welcome. "You are looking for the ones who walked into the sky," he said, eyes squinting against the light. "You think they are gone, but they are only far." Far from what? From your way of seeing. The Hopi do not call them Anasazi. That word from a Navajo root means ancient enemies. They call them Hisatsinom, the people of long ago, but they don't speak of them in past tense. They speak of them like family, like those who stepped out for a while but may return. The Zuni tell of the emergence, the great migration from the underworld into this world. They say the old ones built villages as waypoints, each with ceremonies to align the people with spirit, sun, and season. Each stop a lesson, a preparation. And when the teachings were complete, they moved on. It wasn't a disappearance, it was a procession. The spiral is their symbol for this journey, not linear, but cyclical. History isn't a line, it's a turning. One Hopi prophecy tells of a time when the world grows noisy, fast, unbalanced. When rivers are dammed, the air choked, the soil forgotten. And in that time, the people of long ago will return not to conquer, but to remind. They walked into the sky, not to escape, but to wait for us. And the elders speak of clouds differently, not as weather, as beings. Cloud people, Kachinas, spirits of the ancestors who return with the rain, who whisper in dreams, who appear in the dances masked and painted, bearing gifts and warnings. They watch us, the elder said, because we are still their work. Their ceremonies preserve memory in motion. Dances to call the rain, songs to guide the seasons, stories that seem, to the uninitiated, like myth but feel, to those who listen, like instruction. One Zuni storyteller told me the names of old places match no modern tongue, but they align with stars, with water, with bones buried far beneath the desert. "You don't find them by map," she said. "You find them by remembering." And maybe that's why the ruins endure. Because they are not ruins. They are reminders. Not of a people who vanished, but of a people who transformed. Who understood the earth not as a resource, but as a relative. Who followed not power, but pattern. And who left not to flee, but to fulfill. The wind rose as I left the mesa, carrying the scent of pinon and ash. I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Because somewhere, the people of long ago are still walking, still dancing, still watching the sky. Some places don't appear on maps. They exist in memory, in whispers, in the cautious gestures of those who know better than to speak too loud. Grand Gulch is one of those places. A winding canyon carved into the heart of southern Utah, deep, narrow, and rarely traveled. Its walls bleed with time, layered in sandstone, each curve 1,000 years old. I arrived just before dusk. The air was still. The canyon seemed to listen. I followed an old game trail, barely visible, winding through brush and stone. Hours passed, then a shadow, not natural, angular, a crack in the cliff face, just wide enough to slip through. I hesitated. The locals had warned me. Some doors are still guarded, but I had come too far. Inside, the air was cool, dry. Dust clung to my boots and rose in slow clouds with every step. My headlamp lit the chamber, a narrow vault carved by hand and time. And there, against the back wall, were the remains of a sealed room. Stacked stone, precisely laid, not tumbled, not broken, deliberately closed. I removed only the top few stones, carefully, respectfully. Inside, the chamber was untouched. Clay pots still stood upright. Woven sandals sat side by side, their fibers intact despite the centuries. A gourd bowl, blackened with soot, rested atop a flat stone, and beside it, a flute. Simple, carved from bone, silent now, but once it must have sung. Nothing here was buried. It was placed, laid out like someone would return, or perhaps, like someone never truly left. There were no human remains, no bones, no ash, just belongings. Not cast away, but enshrined. I didn't touch anything else. Some rooms are not meant to be disturbed. I backed away and resealed the stones. What struck me most was not what I saw, but what I felt. The air in that chamber was watching. Not ominous, but aware, as if the room itself remembered, as if it waited. Why had they sealed it? Was this a tomb? A sanctuary? A doorway? Some archaeologists call these places storage rooms, but that word feels hollow. These weren't pantries. They were sanctuaries, shrines, or maybe vaults of memory spaces carved not for survival, but for significance. Places meant to hold not things, but meaning. Some Pueblo elders believe certain chambers were left behind intentionally, not abandoned, but preserved as markers, not of presence, but of promise. Signs for those who would come after, for those who might one day remember. Outside, the canyon was dark now. The stars were rising above the rim, slow, eternal. The silence wrapped around me like a shroud. And I realized I wasn't alone. Not in the fearful sense, but in the sacred one. Because the chamber I found wasn't just a place. It was a choice. A final gesture from a people who knew they were stepping out of history and into something else. And they left us a room, not to explain, but to remind that they were here, that they chose to go, and that some doors, if you listen, still open. The trail to Comb Ridge is a crooked one-part canyon, part spine of the earth. I hiked it at sunrise, the shadows still long, the cliffs glowing red as if lit from within. Locals say the ridge is alive, that it holds memories. I didn't understand that until I found the mural. It was etched into a high alcove, only reachable by a narrow scramble up the sandstone. Faint, but intact. The kind of place most would miss unless they were searching for something they couldn't name. It began with the familiar spirals, handprints, abstract animals. But at the center, a ladder. Not carved from wood, but from light and stone. Each rung led upward, away from the figures below. And at the top, a human shape with wings. Not feathers, light. The figure was radiant, outstretched, arms wide, head crowned with rays. Around it, stars. Below, more human forms reached upward, some mid-step on the ladder. Others still grounded, waiting. The interpretation is debated. Some say it's a ceremonial scene, a depiction of myth. Others claim it's symbolic of rain, migration, or transformation. But standing there, the sandstone warm under my palms, I didn't feel metaphor. I felt motion, as if the wall wasn't describing, but documenting. Flight. Not of birds, of people. The Hopi speak of sky beings, Kachinas, who descend during sacred ceremonies, not as gods, but as teachers, messengers, and sometimes family. In their stories, some among the ancient ones were taken, not by force, but by choice. Called upward, transformed. I followed the ladder with my eyes. It wasn't just vertical, It twisted, arched more like a spiral staircase than a carpenter's tool. It echoed the movement of the Milky Way, a cosmic current, and perhaps a path. Somewhere between symbolism and memory. I touched one rung. The stone was warm. And suddenly, I saw the pattern in other sites. Petroglyphs with figures rising, spirals leading into the sky, starbursts not as decoration but destinations. Were these the exit signs? Or invitations? Across the southwest, similar murals appear, human forms with radiant heads, bird-like wings, or trailing lines behind them like comet tails. Flight, ascension, return. The Anasazi, it seems, were not obsessed with death, but with movement, cycles, passage. They weren't waiting for the end. They were climbing towards something else. And this mural, quiet, unmarked, hidden among the rocks, was more than art. It was instruction. Some believe the latter is the path of the soul. Others think it's the migration map of a people following the stars. But what if it's both? What if the latter wasn't carved after they left, but before? A promise to those left behind, that this world is not the only one. That stone can remember flight, and that the sky is not out of reach, only awaiting the climb. The path was narrow and choked with dust. I followed it to a low kiva, half sunken into the high desert plateau. The roof had collapsed long ago, but its foundation held stones placed with care, perfectly circular, as if the builders knew the shape echoed something deeper. I descended slowly, my boots tapping against ancient stone steps, until I stood at the center where the hearth once smoldered, and there it was. The Sipapu, a small hole in the floor, no larger than a fist, but infinitely more than empty space. In Hopi cosmology, the Sipapu marks the place of emergence, the doorway through which the first people crawled into this world from the one before. It is sacred. It is origin. And perhaps it is destination. Because as I knelt beside it, I wondered, what if it wasn't just about where we came from? What if it also tells us where we're going? The Anasazi left these openings in their kivas deliberately, not for airflow, not for ritual alone. The whole represents passage, between worlds, between states of being, emergence, and return. In some versions of the story, the underworld is not hellish, but formative. The first world was dark, the second, too wet, the third, too chaotic. Only in the fourth, this one, did the people find balance. But the journey wasn't over. The fifth world still awaits. The Sipapu is both memory and prophecy. And if the Anasazi saw the signs drought, silence, celestial alignments, perhaps they knew their time in the fourth world was ending. And so they returned. Not backward, inward. Across the southwest, spiral symbols accompany these sacred places. They don't point down or up, they draw you in. A visual guide, a reminder that reality is layered, not linear. Some theorists, stretching beyond anthropology, suggest the Anasazi may have believed in or even accessed inner realms, hollow places within the earth where spirits reside, or where ancestors dwell in waiting. It's easy to dismiss such ideas, until you stand in a kiva alone, with only wind and dust and time pressing against your skin, and realize the Sipapu feels open. Not just metaphorically, but spatially. I dropped a stone into it once. No echo, no clink, just silence. And then faintly the wind shifted and the temperature dropped. A breath from below. The Hopi say that when the fifth world comes, it will rise through the old Sipapus. The cloud people, the light walkers, will emerge again, not as ghosts, but as guides. Perhaps that's what the Anasazi were preparing for. Not disappearance, but return. I brushed sand away from the edge. The hole was smooth, worn, used. A portal, not to escape, but to transform. And maybe that's what they understood better than we do. That not all doors open forward. Some open inward, through stone, through story, through silence. I arrived in Oribe, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America, on the edge of a storm. Thunder cracked in the distance. The sky darkened, not with night, but with purpose. The elder I'd come to meet simply looked up and smiled. "They're coming," he said. "Not raindrops, not lightning. The Kachinas." To the Hopi, the Kachinas are more than myth. They are presence. Beings who come with the clouds, who live among the stars, who teach, protect, observe, and when needed, intervene. They are not gods. They are ancestors. Allies from beyond. And in their stories, the Anasazi were never abandoned. They were accompanied. In the dry season, the Kachinas descend, masked, painted, embodied in sacred dances. The ceremonies are precise, timed to the stars and the needs of the earth. The Kachinas bring rain, fertility, balance, but they also bring remembrance. I watched a Hopi dancer become one. He wore a towering headdress, woven with feathers and colored symbols. His face was hidden behind a carved mask, wide-eyed, solemn, glowing in the firelight. He moved with a rhythm older than language, every step echoing against the canyon walls. He wasn't performing. He was channeling. The belief runs deep that the Kachinas are not just spirits, but travelers. Some say they come from the third Mesa. Others believe they hail from stars beyond Orion. Beings of light who gifted corn, fire, and instruction to the early people. And when the time came, they took them home. The idea appears in Zuni stories too, skyships, beings cloaked in cloud, who guided the migration routes of the ancients. Not in force, but in ritual. It echoes even in Navajo tales of star people who taught weaving, healing, and the secret names of the wind. We in the modern world ask, why did the Anasazi vanish? But the Hopi ask, why do we assume they stayed behind? They may have returned with the Kachinas, not to escape hardship, but to fulfill a promise. Because the Kachinas aren't distant. They return. Every year, every storm, every dance. Not as fantasy, but as reminder that the old ones were never alone. And neither are we. One carving I saw near Second Mesa showed a figure rising into the air, surrounded by spirals and stars. A Kachina? An ancestor? Or both? They are often depicted with antennae-like crowns mirrored in petroglyphs across Anasazi sites. Their eyes are round, watching, their bodies fluid, shifting, half light, half memory. Some see ancient astronauts, others see metaphor. But in the canyon winds and ceremony smoke, the distinction blurs. The Anasazi built their lives in harmony with these beings, not fearing them, but dancing with them. And when they left, they didn't run. They rose, not just because of drought or prophecy, but because the sky opened, and someone was waiting. Even now, the elders say, when you see rain on the horizon or a cloud shaped like a spiral, don't look away. Watch. Listen. Someone may be returning. The first time I touched the wall at Pueblo Bonito, I expected it to fall. 800 years exposed to the desert sun, winter winds, and monsoon rains. And yet, it stood, solid, unyielding, warmed by the day, breathing in the night. This wasn't just architecture. It was resilience. The Anasazi didn't build for comfort. They built for continuity. Each stone was shaped by hand, sandstone bricks, smoothed to precision, stacked with care. The mortar was a blend of mud and ash, but it held like concrete. Some walls were 3 feet thick at the base, tapering upward with an elegance engineers still admire. Pueblo Bonito alone held over 800 rooms, some 5 stories tall, in a time before cranes, before pulleys, just human hands and shared purpose. And yet, so many of these ruins remain. Not in fragments, in form, as if the very land had chosen to preserve them. Why? Why do these walls still stand? when so many others built centuries later have crumbled into dust. Some say it's the stone, others, the climate. But when I walked through the ruins at Salmon Aztec, Hovenweep, each with doorways aligned to the solstice, each with rooms cooled by airflow alone, I realized it wasn't just what they built, it was how. Their cities breathed with the earth. Their walls followed the wind. Their windows faced the sun not for light but for balance. They didn't conquer the land. They cooperated with it. And perhaps that's why the land returned the favor. Even the great Kivas, those sunken ceremonial chambers, resist erosion. Their ceilings have collapsed, yes, but their foundations endure. And in some, when you whisper, the walls still carry your voice in perfect circles. Memory, encoded in structure. It's more than clever engineering. It's spiritual intention. Every wall, every plaza, every rooftop was placed not just with purpose, but with presence. Aligned to stars, mirroring constellations, responding to seasons. These weren't buildings. They were instruments, calibrated to the cosmos. And they were meant to last, not just to shelter, to remind that harmony is possible, that human hands can shape without scarring, that what is built in balance endures. I climbed a tower at Hovenweep once the bricks were still tight, unmoved. Wind whistled through the slits where watchers once stood. It didn't feel ruined. It felt waiting. These places are not tombs. They're timekeepers. Still counting the days, still waiting for a footstep, a song, a return. And maybe that's the answer to the great mystery. Maybe the Anasazi didn't vanish. Maybe they built their message into the walls, and then walked away. Not into the sky, but into memory, leaving behind structures not to be understood, but to be felt. To remind us that permanence does not require conquest, only communion. The wind was rising again at Mesa Verde. I stood alone on a high ledge, the canyon stretching out in every direction, quiet, vast, carved like scripture into the body of the earth. Behind me, the cliff dwellings slumbered in shadow. Ahead, only sky, and I felt it again. Not the weight of absence, but the echo of movement. As if the stone itself remembered the last footsteps that passed this way. They call it disappearance. But the deeper I've gone, the more ruins I've sat in, the more Kivas I've descended, the more stories I've been told I've begun to understand. The Anasazi didn't disappear. They transcended. They read the signs in the stars. They felt the silence in the springs. They heard the wind shift in the canyon walls. And when the moment came, they knew. This world was only part of the journey. So they left behind their sandals, their pots, their dwellings. And they walked, not with fear, but with intention. Some climbed the roads that mirrored Orion's spine. Others followed the spiral paths back into the Earth's memory. Still others danced with the storm gods, vanishing into the clouds that brought the rain. But none of them were lost. They were answering something. A call older than drought, older than stone, older than time. And maybe that's why their architecture remains. Their petroglyphs shimmer in moonlight. Their roads still defy logic. Because they didn't build for their moment. They built for ours. A trail of reminders. A map in stone. A whisper to those of us still asking the question, where did they go? They went where we're all headed, in the end. Into mystery. Into memory. Into the next world, not with resignation, but with grace. Not fleeing, arriving. I took one last look at the cliff dwellings, sunlit now, glowing in the late afternoon heat. And I felt no sadness, only awe. Because I wasn't looking at ruins. I was looking at a threshold. And somewhere, beyond that final ridge, the ancient ones are still walking. The dust still clings to my boots. My notebook is full, its pages heavy with sketches, questions, and the weight of wonder. But even now, staring into the coals of this small fire, I know I've barely begun to understand. The Anasazi weren't a puzzle to be solved. They were a path to be followed. Each Kiva, each carving, each silent wall was not an answer, it was an invitation, a reminder that history doesn't fade, it waits. And when we step into the ruins with open eyes, it speaks. Not in language, in alignment, in feeling, in silence that is more truthful than any record. I came searching for what was lost, but I found something still alive. In the rhythm of ancient roads, I saw purpose. In the absence of graves, I saw transformation. And in the stars above those vast stone cities, I saw the outline of a people who never truly left. They didn't vanish. They evolved. And maybe, in their story, we find the edge of our own. A reminder that not all who disappear are gone. Some become the wind that moves the sand, the rain that feeds the canyon floor, the silence that answers when we dare to ask the old questions. Another piece of the puzzle, another secret swallowed by the ages. But I've learned one thing on this path. History doesn't whisper, it waits. And now, so will I. Until the next journey, until the next forgotten place, until the next voice in the stone says, "Walk with me."